Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet. It's also a pandemic planet at the moment. 6 months has taken a virus from a novel experiment, interspecies experiment in China, to being such a global force that, as we discussed on Friday, there are isolated Indian tribes in the Amazon who are now being assaulted by the virus, even as they're figuring out what to do about this year's burning season in the Amazon. And we have another session on that coming up soon. I'm Andy Revkin, and I am, after 35 years in journalism, I'm still a journalist. I still count myself as a journalist, but I'm now at the Earth Institute of Columbia University building a program here, an initiative on communication and sustainability. Like, how do you make information matter in a world that right now, for sure, often feels like there's too much information? And the infodemic, as you've probably seen that hashtag, I think the part of it that we focus on the most, and we've done several sessions on my Sustain What webcast on this, the part that we focus on the most is the misinformation part. There's a lot of inaccurate information intentionally being flown around the world. There's confusion. There's the aspect that the interfaces that we use to find information these days used to be the front page of a newspaper or a magazine like this, my 1988 cover story on global warming. It used to be a thing. It used to be simple. The media were a mediator, and official voices were mediators. And now you're like in this information landscape that's it has this plastic characteristic. It's actually being designed to distract you most of the time, being designed to confuse you some of the time. And a big chunk of the algorithms that are out there in the social media interface between you and the rest of the world, some of those features are designed to addict you. And that's done by validating you or aggravating you, and often doing it sequentially. So one post you see is designed to get your attention by stroking you, the kind you like, and the others that get your attention are the ones you have to respond to because they're so antithetical to what you think. So what do you do in a landscape like that? Well, the media still make a difference. I love my friends at the New York Times and NPR and CNN and the whole landscape of communication professionals as well. But it's up to us increasingly as news consumers as well. And those of you who have come here to learn a little bit about how to tell your story or shape your conversations better so that you make a difference in this landscape of information and consequence. The goal here is to help you do that. So I've had for 3 months this thing called Sustain What, which is a 3 or 4 times a week conversation aimed at getting through the pandemic with the fewest regrets and building a more resilient, inclusive, sustainable planet going forward. Sundays are poetry and song. We just had a wonderful session. Wednesdays tend to be policy. We just last week were doing a serious session. How can you build an immune system for the planet, a digital immune system, a sensory system on the ground where you need it, and getting that information where it's needed so that people can make good decisions. And then Fridays are about the press and about the media. So every Friday, 1 o'clock. And we've just decided that on Mondays, right now, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, I'm going to run a workshop that will be about what you can do actually today, tomorrow, even in the next hour that can make a difference. Using Twitter in new ways, building communities in new ways, having your own sensory apparatus and your own filters so you don't feel so overwhelmed by the information environment around us. I hope you'll share this right now with others who you think might be interested. These webcasts all go to 4 different places on the internet and can be shared there live and then, of course, shared after the fact. Today, I have the pleasure and the honor of meeting 2 people, one at Columbia and one who works on a lot of different projects around the world and very innovative ones, to discuss their learning journey together, how they came together. But before I get to that, I'm going to make some general points here. So this is my initiative. Again, I've been at this a long time as a journalist. You can see me there in Greenland in 2004, back in the day, with my video camera already. Even though I was a New York Times reporter, I was using video gear, or whatever it took to tell the story, to bring back the story. And we were, I came to Columbia last fall, and we did all the traditional things you want to do. We had convenings. We were starting to create a network across the campus of people, so that, as you, in this case, is the artist Maya Lin, who famously designed at the age of 21 the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. We were engaging her with scientists and how to work on a new video project she was doing. And that was all great. And then along comes COVID-19, right? And everything got locked down. And weirdly, it took the whole landscape of what I'm doing back to where I had been for a long time. When I was at the New York Times, I developed a blog called .earth. And so here, this Sustain What enterprise is really what I was doing at .earth at the New York Times, but this is now video as opposed to textual blogs. And we still have a website and the like. So that's the landscape that's changed for me. This is kind of the confusion mode. If you just do a Google image sometime and type in words like COVID-19, and it's a pretty horrifying landscape of results. We've even if you take away the presidential politics, it's really, there's so much confusion and noise. It's hard to kind of figure out how to navigate. I did insert something interesting in there. You see the Scream, the Edvard Munch painting that's become such an icon of late. I could show you, maybe I will later, what a Chinese artist did with that, using photographs of thousands of people in their lockdown in China. He created a Scream equivalent, like a mosaic of photographs. And there were these really interesting experiments. Lockdown forced everyone to think in new ways, right? And at Johns Hopkins, which developed, we all know, virtually anybody out there knows of the COVID-19 dashboard that Johns Hopkins University launched very early in the game. And it's a fantastic, sort of a stable place to go for data on how we navigate, how you understand where there are hotspots and what's happening with COVID-19, with where the infection is, where the testing is. And what I learned is, so interestingly, about a month ago, was the backstory was that basically two people in the applied engineering department on January 22nd, since this is right when those first tweets were coming out saying there's something really bad going on in China, they jumped on this and they launched this then, at that very moment. You can see them here, and click back to this later to learn more about them. And it ended up garnering billions with a B, billions of views, even in the early days. And now it's a sort of a bulwark, a foundational element of what's out there. And when you think back to how it got to be, it was because of an initiative by two people who you can connect with on Twitter and learn how they did that. And I'm hoping that they will be on this post sometime soon. Here at Columbia, there's all kinds of innovation and scrambling to create new ways of engaging with the community of Columbia, within Columbia, and the community outside in the wider world. I'm really impressed with the professional staff here, and with scientists and young scholars. People like Seamus Khan, who was a chairman of the sociology department, who, you're chairman of a department, you're a tenured professor, you don't have to do much beyond just scholarship and teaching. But he dove in and created this youthremote.learning.com website in a matter of days with some colleagues. And he taught his own instant pop-up classes for kids in middle school and high school. That's the kind of initiative and sort of instinct that I'm hoping to foster. Not everybody, can do that or should do that. Not everybody should be on Twitter. Not everybody can create visual graphics, but we can, as a community, do better by far, and often by being a community. Just give you a brief snapshot from Columbia, but I think this is probably, if you did a survey of your friends, I almost guarantee you'd see the same result. Right after I started here, I sent out this missive through the internet at Columbia, asking people about their attitudes on public engagement on social media. And you can see here, the red is basically experienced or enthusiastic people. And the questions on the right were, do you use social media? Are you engaged with the public in face-to-face ways around your work? And you can see there's a pretty big chunk, like a third to 40% of us, of this community at the Earth Institute, are like, yes, absolutely. And there's a pretty good chunk. The orange are people who are hopeful but hesitant. Hopeful but hesitant. And that to me says there's a huge opportunity. Just by convening those who are enthusiasts with those who are hopeful but hesitant, I think we have some work to do, some opportunities. And think about that again in your friends. If you are an enthusiast about communicating online, it's probably not too big of a nudge for you to be more helpful in mentoring to friends and colleagues who might want to do more than they're already doing. So that's, and you can see on the left, we also asked people, what are your relevant avocations or skills? Like if you wanted to be a mentor, not a mentee, and it's all over the map. It's, photography, graphics, creative writing, music, and all of those can play a role in more effective communication. So there are these skill sets all around us, but you have to kind of know they're there and know how to poke at them to get something done in a new way that you might not think of. And that leads me to today's guests. And it's really a pleasure to get to meet Craig Spencer, Dr. Craig Spencer, who is you direct the emergency medicine.
The Global Health and Emergency Medicine Program, yeah.
Right, but we'll tell people more in a minute. And here's Isabeau Doucet. Are you on the West Coast?
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco.
And
Hi,
we'll talk
thanks
in a
for
minute
having
about.
me.
It's great to have you both here. I'm just thrilled we could do this. So Isabeau, we're going to tell a little connection story here. This is not Match.com, but it's a kind of Match.com, right? We're in a landscape where you can find people, and not necessarily, if you know how to look, you can kind of create new things by looking in new ways. And here you can see Isabeau has been a journalist, sort of a multimedia producer for quite a while, and including specifically at AJ Plus, which is an Al Jazeera innovation. I'll ask you the history of it because I don't really know how old it is or the like. And you've done all kinds of projects that are fascinating and impactful. And then again, we have Craig, who came to the world's attention in 2014 through his work on Ebola in Guinea as a Médecins Sans Frontières doctor, Doctors Without Borders. And he came back with a problem. He was infected with Ebola and generated, the consequences of that played out in pretty momentous ways that created a huge number of headlines. And so this story is the story of how you two connected. So maybe we'll start briefly, Isabeau, if you could just describe your background and how you ended up even hooked up with AJ Plus, a little bit about it, and then we'll get to Craig.
Yeah, so I wanted to be a journalist, but I didn't want to get saddled with student debt. So I decided to just send myself to Haiti after the earthquake. And I found a bunch of contacts and sort of quickly started kind of publishing stories about the sort of reconstruction and the hurricane, the earthquake aid gone wrong. And that's how I started working for Al Jazeera. And I was doing print pieces for The Guardian and whoever would publish me. And then doing video pieces for Al Jazeera. And then, yeah, just struggling as a freelancer, and finally thought I have to get a job as on staff, and got hired at AJ Plus in 2013, just as they were kind of, it hadn't launched yet. It was just a kind of an idea. And so I kind of packed up my bags and moved to San Francisco and started making videos for the internet. We didn't really know what that meant because back in 2013, a lot of news organizations were just sort of reusing videos that were made for TV and sort of publishing them online. But what we were trying to do was kind of make videos that were native to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, not sort of broadcast friendly. So subtitles and text on screen and meant to be watched on your mobile phone. And that's how I started doing work for AJ Plus. And I worked for them for, I guess I've been working for them since then, basically.
So that's, and we'll get to the next steps in a second. You just said something that I often when I talk to young journalists these days, or people who want to get into the field, they're desperate to know what to do. And here I am, a 35-year veteran who grew up at a time when I had a science background. I didn't want to be a journalist. I wanted to be a marine biologist. And then I sort of migrated into science writing. But that was at a time when there were magazines and,
right.
It was sort of thriving in the 80s. And so I did evolve into the digital space significantly at the times. But one of the key ways to get work is to be where the news is. And I think what you just said about just going to Haiti, obviously you'd have to demonstrate your credibility and your skills, but being where the news is one way. being where no one else is, or being there beforehand is important.
Exactly. And I was, it was beyond my wildest dreams that the Guardian would write to me and ask me to write for them like that. But that's what happens when you're in a place where there's a lot of news and not enough journalists sort of covering it. And that's what I tell people who would like to be a journalist but don't know if it's a feasible field, which is a very good question. But just start doing the work. And another funny thing that sort of ties to this piece, which used animation, was that I had studied painting as well, and I had never really sold any of them. And I wanted to raise money to go to pay for my trip to Haiti. And so I just put all these paintings I had made for years online and invited my friends to fund my journalism by buying a painting. And it worked. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Just finding creative ways of just funding those initial trips to send yourself places is crucial.
And then, of course, we'll see in a second how that kind of comes together. We go to the next slide. So there was this. So Craig, did you grow up communicative? Like even before you became a doctor, did you write or anything? Were you in high school or college? Were you into journalism or communication or any of that stuff? Or just
No, not at all. No, I never really wrote, never thought about it, never thought about being a journalist. I also wanted to be a marine biologist, but I wanted to be a sharkologist. And then I was told that there's no such thing as a sharkologist.
I know some.
Only a marine biologist. Yeah. And then so then I was like, all right, I guess I'll be a doctor instead. But no, communication, messaging, journalism, none of that was part of my mind. I didn't even read the news in my 20s. So no, not at all.
Right. That's so interesting. So here you go. You went through medical school. You seem to be. It seems that you were always focused on emergency medicine or kind of urgent care. Is that fair to say?
I wanted to be a heart surgeon. I wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. That's why I went to medical school. That was my goal. After being a sharkologist, I wanted to be a rich heart surgeon. That was it. And I went to medical school and worked internationally on a couple trips, and then took a year off, moved to China. And then came back to the US and decided I wanted to really focus and devote my work to global health, which is what I did. And emergency medicine was the best stepping stone for that, because it exposed you to men, women, heart attacks, delivering babies, everything. And I wanted to be prepared for it all.
Right. And had you been in circumstances overseas already before you did the Ebola work in Guinea? Were you already practiced in that arena?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the reason I went to West Africa, is I knew that the number of providers in West Africa during the 2014-2016 Ebola outbreak was dismally small. There were organizations like the one I ultimately ended up working for, Médecins Sans Frontières, that did respond, but again, the response was late. We needed way more resources, and there was, basically this call for providers who would be willing, nurses and doctors and others that would be willing to provide care on the front line. And I had already worked a lot in East Africa, and in West Africa, I had experience with kind of scary diseases already. And so I said to myself and said to my wife, if I'm not doing this, who are the people that are doing it when we need it? Kind of this global solidarity and this global response.
Right. So we'll fast forward to your return. I want to sort of fast forward through that experience when you got back, because there's a whole nother hour to do just on that initial chapter of your public life.
Yeah. But
essentially, you became the focus of a huge amount of news interest after you got back, and you ended up treated for Ebola here in New York City. Is there a quick set of lessons you learned at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I never had been in media. I don't think I'd ever been interviewed for anything. I didn't want to be on TV. That's something I got really anxious and, talking in front of people, let alone a camera to millions of people. And so when I left the hospital and was asked to give a statement, I focused on what I thought was the important part of what we needed to focus on, knowing that millions of people and a bunch of cameras would be pointed on me. And that was, we need to think about the impact this is continuing to have in communities in West Africa. The shift of focus from, thousands and thousands of cases in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone to one case in New York City. And I didn't really know how to do that. I had a lot of support from the university where I worked, from the organization I worked with, to really help me understand how to think about a message, how I want to share it, and then what I wanted to do after. And what I wanted to do after was basically no media, cut off, not comment on it, not take up any oxygen from the news cycle that I thought should have went to what was actually happening, continuing to happen in West Africa. And that's what I did. I thought that was behind me. I wrote a couple things, wrote a piece in the New England Journal, a piece in New York Times. I did an interview for NPR, and that was largely about it.
And then how much did you work at that point with some of the staff here in communication at Columbia?
I was talking to him on almost a daily basis for a while. There was a lot of requests to do media. There was things that I certainly could have done, high profile TV shows and primetime shows, and that just wasn't what I wanted at all. I hadn't been as exposed to the media blitz while I was in the hospital. My TV conveniently didn't work, which was quite nice. So I didn't know a lot of what was going on outside, and quite frankly, I was more focused on what was happening with me and my family. It was really only when I got out that I was able to kind of absorb some of the larger impact. But yeah, no, I had assistance because, again, this was uncharted territory for me. I had never been on TV, didn't want to be on TV, and the idea of speaking on a primetime program just, made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, and you'd never had Ebola.
Yeah.
That too. So then we'll take this to the current moment, which was early this year in March. I guess you started with a Twitter thread, and then that became almost immediately, the Washington Post snapped it up as a op-ed, and then that led to what we're going to get to in a second. So were you already feeling proficient at Twitter by this year?
No, I had about 500 followers in February.
Wow.
Maybe a little bit more. And then when at the end of February, having worked in an epidemic before, having seen a lot of the warning signs, having seen some of the messaging that was coming out, I just started following really closely, trying to correct some of the messaging, trying to add some of my own. And that was, again, before this really showed up in New York City. I remember drafting an op-ed that I sent to the New York Times about the coming storm in New York and the lessons from Ebola. And that was in early March, and it wasn't picked up. And looking back retroactively, it was all right, but the scene just wasn't there yet, and the media space wasn't there. But I really wasn't on Twitter. I didn't tweet that much. I think the most that I'd ever had on of a like of one of my messages was like 300 when I was working on board the MSF's Aquarius in the Mediterranean in 2017, the migrant search and rescue ship, in the middle of this massive, news story. But no, it was something I wasn't proficient at, something I didn't know really how to do. But I think I looked at others and thought about how I can try to share clear messaging, and I guess that's what I did.
And that, I think you said at the time that you were kind of doing that as a way to express and explain to your friends and relatives, what was going on. It wasn't necessarily meant to be a widely read thing, or maybe you were, I don't know if you were hoping that, or whether it was really just a way to express yourself.
I think anyone that writes something hopes that it gets seen. Did I have any expectation that a bunch of people would see it, or that the president would share it, or that it would result in all of this? Absolutely not. I mean, even I think a couple days before I wrote this message that ultimately got made into the video with Isabeau's and Al Jazeera's help, I wrote something about social distancing in New York and why it was important, basically just reflecting on what I was seeing in the emergency department, why it was starting to scare me, and sharing some type of the reality, because I felt like that wasn't coming out. I remember in mid-March, there was these conflicting messages of, do we need to shut down the schools or not? Things that in retrospect seem absolutely crazy that we were debating at that time. So it was around that time that I started sharing what I was seeing in the emergency department, COVID patients, my concerns about what would happen in terms of preparation through the city. And I had a couple messages before that I think that were pretty pretty well received. And I think the day before I wrote this one, maybe 2 days before, I wrote something in 10 seconds before I went to bed, saying that I was, really honored to work in the ED. It's a busy day. It's crazy. We have a lot of COVID patients. Ambulance sirens are increasing, and happy to go back in tomorrow. And I think that, was seen a lot. And then I think tuned a lot of people in, so that when I wrote this, there were a lot of people, I think, listening and really ready for that message of the reality from the front line.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Timing and context makes such a difference.
I had no idea. I sat down on the couch and in probably 20 minutes over a glass of whiskey at around, I don't know, sometime like 10 or 11 p.m., just quickly wrote that message. Didn't really think about the wording. It was very free form, and then sent it, went to bed. And then in the morning, got a call from the opinion editor at at Washington Post that they wanted to run it as a piece. And I said, great, it's already out there. Go for it. You can have it.
Wow. So Isabeau, you were doing your own work already on COVID-19, I assume. What kinds of things were you already focused on at that point? And then we're going to get to this sort of nexus.
Yeah, so I had been kind of frantically trying to find nurses or doctors or people on the front line who would be able to record a video diary for us of what they were going through. And it was very challenging to kind of get access to find people who would be willing to even do such a thing. And then trying to get permission from hospitals was nearly impossible. I mean, for me, it was impossible. I didn't have success. And then even just trying to get clarity from the nurses unions on like what kind of whistleblower protections would these nurses have if they chose to speak without permission. They were like, you need to get your own lawyer, your own counsel. So it was just very challenging to get access to where this war was we're fighting this war that no one can see and that it's really hard to get access to, and having to rely on, footage shot by people who are not necessarily, professional shooters, which, makes a big difference.
Right.
And then even if we were able to physically get access, like our company wouldn't really want to put us in a situation. Like at that point, we have a policy, we wouldn't send a crew into a hospital to film something. So there's basically a very challenging story to tell, in a human way and put a human face on it. Especially given like even with the mask and all the PPE, like usually with a kind of a video piece like this, you want to really get as close as possible to the story and to the faces and the emotions of people who are living it. And for this particular story, it was just really, really challenging, both because of our HIPAA and, the privacy concerns, but also just, because of the way to contain COVID is by, containing it and not letting you get close to it. So after, a lot of frustrating attempts, I had a nurse who had recorded like a 2-week video diary for us. And at the time that we had first found her, this was in Berkeley, Oakland, we thought that California was on the rise. But after those 2 weeks, like the city shut everything down and went into lockdown so quickly that she hadn't had a single case.
Oh, right.
So that kind of killed that video diary. And yeah, when we found like Craig's Twitter feed, it was just so clear and close up. He really like sticks your face right into it, in a way that in the way that we wouldn't have been able to do with photography or video footage, and really sort of take you through blow by blow the sort of day in the life. And I think that having just that really powerful personal account, it was immediately clear that this could be a really great, powerful video to animate. And I didn't do the drawing or the animation, but I have done stuff in the past using drawing and animation for AJ Plus. And it was always usually reserved for situations in which the story was happening, like in a prison. You know, how do we cover Chelsea Manning, or immigration detention centers, or places where we physically can't get footage out of, or stories where this really powerful thing happened in the past. How do we share that story? So we've, you know, there's certain, or if we need to protect the identity of someone, you know, animation is really useful. There's certain scenarios in which it comes in really handy. And I never thought that, you know, this is like the biggest story in, you know, maybe our lifetimes, but certainly the biggest news story in the US. And I never thought that like we would have to rely on that for this, you know, basically this war that we're not allowed to film. We're not allowed to get to the front lines. But so I think that's why it was really impactful. I think people just hadn't seen, you know, such a close, rich account of what's going on the front lines.
It's
I had a last
remarkable.
thought, but yeah.
Well, no, and that the applicability of this to other circumstances is so clear. Solitary confinement. There's so many things you can approach this way.
Right.
And you,
and even I think climate change, I think, is another one of those stories that's really hard to get access to like to make it real for people in a very visual way, in a very sort of personal way. Just because it's just this massive thing that you can't really see with your eyes necessarily, and the sort of chain of causality between the people, the things that are causing it, and, you know, the things that are being impacted by it is just very kind of, it's not as easy as someone punching someone in the face, you know, it's like, no, it's really challenging.
Well, that goes back to 30 years of doing this. Look at this great, scary story, you know, and it's like, it's all abstract. It's all, there's greenhouse gases building in the atmosphere.
Wow.
There's cigarette ads on the back, which is pretty freaking weird.
Yeah, no
kidding. But a lot of the journalism, when I was at the New York Times covering climate, it's the same thing, you know, and the disconnect between the causes, and even the melting of the glaciers I visited in Greenland. You know, it's really cool to get on the Greenland ice sheet and show you the cascading meltwater, and then linking that to the everyday flooding in coastal Miami and poor communities of Miami. I'm with you completely on the role of visualizations of various kinds.
And I just remembered the last thing I wanted to say. You know, why this is so important and so challenging is also because we're dealing with a situation where there's an information war, and like a lot of people are not convinced that this is real, and for both COVID and climate change. And so having these kinds of really powerful stories, you know, and Craig, like your writing was just so perfect and just so clear. You need to keep writing. So yeah, like just having that kind of really up close, intimate, personal account, and being able to turn it into a story that people can sort of just, you know, feel, makes a huge difference. I would love to do something equivalent for climate change. So if you have any pitches.
We should talk about that. There's, I've also, I was at National Geographic Society for a year before I came to Columbia, working on building new programs around communication innovation and grants. And there they have some people, actually National Geographic Society has the biggest Oculus Prime auditorium in the world, unless it's been supplanted since I was there. 300 Oculus headsets. Wow. So 300 people can sit there and experience the Serengeti, or maybe solitary confinement, or what it's like to experience the COVID-19 front lines in ways that we're still trying to figure out. There's a woman actually on Wednesday, there's a sociologist at Columbia, Courtney Coburn, who'll be on here on Wednesday, who does virtual reality work around race and health. She's trying to figure out ways to use kind of virtual environments to clarify what race means in terms of who ends up getting one health outcome or the other. It's really interesting. That's going to be on Wednesday. And I just realized I should connect you both with her, perhaps. Courtney Coburn. She's at the School of Social Work. And this to me the value of what we're doing right now, hopefully, and again, even after we're done, because it gets archived, is to stimulate some fresh thinking on who needs to be in the room to think about how do you tell a story that has impact. And here, the one thing that we didn't answer yet was how you first connected with each other. Craig, what was the first Twitter message or whatever? How did you two get together?
I got an email from Isabeau, and that's really all. I don't remember when it was sent. It was in probably 300 other emails that I got on the exact same day. At pretty early on, I had no idea how to manage all of the media. I had no idea how to manage, hundreds and hundreds of messages that were coming in every day, from small South Korean newspapers to the New York Times to just, I didn't know who I should be talking to, whether I should be doing print or video, or whether I should be on this program or this one. Again, I had shirked my duties as a communicator after the Ebola epidemic, or purposefully backed off so that I didn't have that experience. I didn't know exactly how to triage these. I did get some assistance from the university, and I got some external assistance, which was super helpful. But I do remember going through 100 of these messages at a time and triaging some of them and putting them in a separate folder. And I don't know what it was about Isabeau's. I didn't know what an AJ Plus was, but something about this idea of making a video, and your pitch was quite succinct and quite simple and different than everybody else. I was getting so many, hey, can you shoot 2 minutes of video for us every single day, and then we'll put it together as a video diary. I was getting hundreds of those. And so that's not what I'm going to do. What Isabeau and the AJ Plus team had proposed in that initial email, for me, was interesting enough that I put a blue flag on it, put it in the mailbox, the triage box, and then ultimately had someone that was working with me later on go back. And I'll have to go look at the timestamps on these, but I think it was some time from when you sent me an email, Isabeau, to we got back to you and said, let's do this. But I remember it one day sitting and thinking, oh, there was that one person that emailed me from AJ Plus about maybe making this animated video. I should write them back. Knowing that I thought it would be a really cool, different project. I hadn't had a pitch like that before, and thinking how, really, even for just posterity, how important that would be to document this in a way that, as Isabeau has pointed out, wasn't really well documented for patient concerns and other legal reasons. So yeah, that was it. It was an email like many of the other emails that I got and didn't respond to. Who knows if I had missed this one, if this project would have come together, but I'm really glad it did.
So let's talk about
and also just to add, if my nurse video diary hadn't gotten sort of killed because she didn't have any COVID cases, we might not have pushed for it. But yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, let's talk about impact. And the simplest, viewership doesn't always translate into impact, but it's a gauge of something. And so this has gotten several million views in the English language version. I think it's translated at least into, I've seen maybe a couple of languages. How many now?
Spanish and French, and maybe I think that it might possibly get translated into Arabic, but I need to, or Portuguese, but that's to be confirmed.
Good. Well, that's a good sign. And what has it's probably too early to know if it's changed the landscape of thinking and reaction and action around this pandemic. But Craig, I don't know. Let's start with you. What's the feedback you've gotten? Maybe parsing the feedback you got from the Twitter feed string versus the Washington Post piece versus this.
So I think what's really important about this is that Isabeau not only spent hours and hours and hours making sure this was right and recording this and re-recording this, and then listening to me painfully do it in French and make that work. But I think your pitch to me, Isabeau, when we finally got talking about this, was not just my initial Twitter feed. It was a mashup of a couple of those. So I sent out that initial one on March 24th. I got 130-something thousand likes. I had a lot of press, a lot of interviews that came out of that. And one of them was the Washington Post opinion piece. And when I spoke to the editor that day, she said, hey, let's think about doing this again going forward, like something once every week or every couple of weeks. And I said, okay, well, I don't know how to write, and I'll see if there's enough material for me to do that. Like, what else can be possibly interesting? that I could do this for you every week. And so, once a week on a Wednesday or Thursday night, I would sit down and have a little whiskey, and after my kid had went to bed and my wife had gone to bed, and just write for 20 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. And then ultimately had a couple more of these opinion pieces that came out in the Washington Post that Isabeau went through, parsed apart, and then put together in a way that I wouldn't have thought about putting them together, but that tells this narrative of a day in the life and these stories that I saw later that weren't initially in that part. So I think, and if you're thinking of this more holistically and comprehensively, and how do we communicate this, not just what the processes are and what I'm seeing, but how this is evolving as well, and how it evolved over the couple of weeks that we were in communication, I think was really, really huge. It got the message, it made the message much stronger. And I think that what the impact that it's had now, there has been a big Twitter following, and that a lot of people saw messages and read them and commented on them and said, thank you so much for sharing the reality. This is exactly what we need, especially when many people feel like we're being gaslighted by the administration. And the Washington Post pieces were great because they got a different audience that, like me, really up until not that long ago, is not on Twitter and is not reading these things. But I think this video has been great, and that it's been now, as you said, seen millions of times on Twitter, but also on Facebook, on Instagram, and a bunch of other different outlets, and has continuously, what I see is that, thank you for sharing this reality. We need to see this reality. We need to know what's happening. People, I think, understood that things were really, really bad. They understood the horrors and thought they understood from some of our writing and other things that we had shared. But this, in terms of a video, not only made it painfully obvious, but also I think depersonalized it in a way that people were still able to watch it and understand what was happening and share it in a way that was clearly, profoundly impactful, and could help them visualize what they had been reading or hearing about for quite some time.
And what do both of you think about so much of the challenge with COVID-19 is that, well, just in the United States, you have 50 states, incredibly variegated attitudes, and not just attitudes, but realities, in terms of hospital space, in terms of other factors. We did a session here recently on Miami where you've got HIV and poverty and a host of different cultures, Haitian, Latino, various flavors of Latino culture. And is there a general message you would have, either of you or both of you, for hospitals and other parts of the country facing their landscapes, of a way to use the lessons from what you've done to build their own relationship with their own community, and using some of these tools? Maybe not always the animation, but maybe yes. I don't know. Does that feel like, I don't know if this has come up. Have many other hospitals tried to do this kind of thing? Or because expanding, the other thing I try to do always is think about, what can I do to not just say, hey, cool example, but how do we create the culture of connectivity that can spread that practice?
Yeah. Any thoughts, Isabeau?
Yeah, I mean, it just made me think that this actually was done, you didn't ask for permission, Craig, from your hospital. This was done, in spite of them, rather than with their collaboration. And I was thinking how important it would be for hospitals to step up their communication game, because, like I said, we're in a war, and a lot of their policies are preventing, communication from the front lines. And that makes it really difficult for people to really understand the impact of COVID-19. So, I would really love to see hospitals sort of try to figure out how they could help and collaborate with journalists a little bit better, because we're sort of on the same side. But, my experience, not just with, Craig's was the only one that was fruitful and positive, but that was not with hospital permission. And I've had, a subsequent project that got killed by the hospital after sort of, stringing us along for a couple of weeks and then saying, nope, sorry, never mind, our doctor can't speak. So that's really frustrating.
Probably because lawyers got in the way.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. And, we don't need, we can definitely shoot things and protect the privacy of of patients. You know, I've done that before. You know, it's not that difficult. But it seems like there's maybe a little bit of ass covering. Pardon my like, you know, I think hospitals also just don't want to be seen, you know, doing things that could potentially be, you know,
Oh, sure.
that they could be sued for in future. And it's just really unhelpful when, like I said, there's a lot of people that just don't know the magnitude of this, and that we're going to be, just because people are bored of the news cycle of COVID, it hasn't gone away. We're going to be dealing with this for a long, long time. So, you know, it's not too late, hospitals, if you're listening, to
Right.
to try to find a way. You know, if you have to like hire journalists or hire PR people to help just kind of facilitate those stories getting out, that would be great.
Well, I want to show you another example. Way down in New Zealand, there's a website called Spinoff. Well, you'll see in a minute. At which a science communicator teamed up with a cartoonist to do a very effective illustration of the value of social distancing, of physical distancing. And this is and it got translated in like 5 or 6 different languages. They've done together several iterations of this and several different messages as well, not just this one. And then just a couple of days ago, Toby Morris noted, just when you thought the COVID work was quieting down here, we got a call from the World Health Organization, working on the world's biggest problem, from my garage in Sandringham, New Zealand, for Spinoff TV. They now have a contract to do some of their visualizations for the World Health Organization. So, and this is what keeps me from being totally bummed out. You know, we're in an information storm. It's like an extreme event. It's like the extreme events I've covered, whether it's the tsunami, you know, geological extreme events, or climate change. We're in an information extreme event right now. And it's exciting when you see this sort of asymmetrical, whoops, I clicked on the wrong link there. This asymmetrical capacity for a great idea to travel and then iterate and help enable a place like the World Health Organization that 2 months ago we had a conversation on here with Laurie Garrett, one of the great reporters on this beat, who had written very critically in The Lancet. She wrote a piece saying, you know, we totally underinvest in public health communication, whether it's World Health Organization, whether it's hospitals, whether it's research universities. If you look at the budgets for communication innovation and you compare them to the budgets for vaccines, it's like a tiny fraction of a portion of that. And we did a session on here recently with the woman, Heidi Larson, who runs the Vaccine Confidence Project. And it's pretty clear from her work that if right now we're not working on understanding the landscape of vaccine knowledge and resistance and trust, even when there is one, it won't get adequately taken up. So I'm glad to see the potential that you guys have kind of essentially demonstrated to cut through some of the bureaucratic red tape, to use visualization where you can't take a picture, to convey emotional power around things that numbers just can't get at. You know, the number of hospital beds, the number of ICU units, it's a number. How many per thousand? That's an interesting judgment. How many ICU beds should 1,000 people have? But when you get to the level of what a doctor experiences, and not only that, but what you conveyed about what families and their suffering elders or other vulnerable patients experience, that feels like we're in there's a possibility to turn the corner here. It does feel to me like an uphill battle. This is still a very small part of the information landscape, but I'm hoping we can kind of expand from what you're thinking and doing. And when this is done, when this is archived in a video, we should all think creatively about how to spread it around and make sure networks of hospitals or MSF, you know, what are the U.S. equivalents of, what are the doctors in the United States who are trying to sort of foster productive outcomes who aren't in Guinea, but who face these same kinds of challenges. I don't know if that's something that, Craig, that you think about a lot.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing that I kept thinking about here is that for the past few weeks, I've been having this dream of finding someone who would finance, this running commercial of putting this piece, as part of 2 commercial breaks, or running it at a time when the exposure would be even greater than it already has been, because I think so many people have seen it. And it's resonated so much with some people, but a lot of people aren't on Twitter, and a lot of people may not be on Facebook, or may not have had this come across. And I think everyone that sees it and is willing to spend, near 6 minutes of their life watching it has been impacted. And I'm hoping it's changed a lot of minds around the severity of what's actually going on, what's happening, not just in New York, but now we're seeing case numbers rise all throughout the country. This could be anywhere. This could be any ICU in the next few weeks or the next few months. And so I have had this wonderful hope that at some point someone would find a way to get this onto different outlets that have even greater exposure. So yeah, if there's a way to do that, I'd love to figure out a way to do that. But yeah,
that's a great.
I think that we've.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I also just think that many organizations right now are trying to think about how we balance the litigious nature of what's going on, especially in already highly litigated spaces like U.S. hospitals, with this desire to share the right information. And this has been a really tricky balance for a lot of organizations and a lot of hospitals. And I don't think that we got the balance quite right. Hopefully there's going to be a lot more people like myself who are happy to share their experiences and are able to share their experiences in a free and kind of open way, because as I think has been made obvious by the uptake of this video and other messages like it, people are really hungry for this information. They want to know this narrative. They need to know what's happening. They need to know what to prepare for, and we're not getting it in any other way, as I think Isabeau has clearly pointed out.
And Isabeau, as I was just saying, the vaccination question is maybe another arena where this could come in handy. It's an area where people's perceptions are so profoundly shaped by their culture and their background. There's this field called cultural cognition, which I stumbled into when I was covering climate change, which basically is empirical work showing that most of the time when you think you're thinking about something, you're actually reacting to it in a more of an instinctive or reflexive way based on cultural predispositions and the like. And that's, by the way, on both ends of the spectrum of belief about something like climate change. And if there's a way to sort of disarm that and just get the story, the narratives out in a more exploratory way where it's not finger wagging. Too often, we get into finger wagging mode, and not just on social media. The New York Times will do a big, special report on vaccination. But what do we do in the media to actually foster the discussions to get communities moving forward with some kind of progress on vaccination policy is another thing. And that's all just going to come to another head in the coming months and year or two. So I do think there's lots more to focus on here. And I've written down what Craig just said as a to-do list thing for me. And I'd like to work with you guys to see if there's a way to get this more broadly, this particular package more broadly seen outside of our bubble, to be a bubble breaker. And
let's get it onto Fox News.
Well, I know.
You got contacts there, Craig, can't you? Hook us up.
Yeah.
And Craig, we have this whole cluster now of social media stars who epidemiologists and physicians and microbiologists even just at Columbia, who, again, like you, had a few dozen or 100 followers and now are kind of a major presence. Angie Rasmussen has been on here 3 or 4 times, a virologist who's really gotten good at Twitter. And maybe we can work together to get at this as well. And I know, Isabeau, they're in the community of sort of unconventional media folks, there's probably a network that I don't know about yet. So, I mean, there are people here at Columbia at the Brown Institute for Media Innovation, like Craig, like Mark Hansen, who we should talk to as well. So I'm hoping that those who are listening and who will watch this later can weigh in with their own ideas. If you, Isabeau, if you had a takeaway, like if someone said, okay, what are you going to do next week that's different now that we've had this conversation? If you had one or two things that come to mind, that would be great. And Craig, if there's anything else other than what we just were talking about, this is a good time to summarize some of those ideas. And I'm going to show a couple more slides in a second. So what's on the to-do list?
I'd love to find a climate change version of this. And I think that, yeah, I guess it would be, I mean, what made it so powerful is that it was, you know, and as Craig, you pointed out to me, you know, the lived experience, you know, it's very hard for people to dispute that. So just really sharing, you know, the lived experience in a way that, you know, is narratively compelling and gripping and honest is super impactful, regardless of the ideological spectrum. So yeah, I'd love to find a way to, you know, find an equally compelling character who could sort of communicate the climate crisis in a way that connects the dots and makes people want to actually do something about it.
And of course, one of the big communication opportunities is to identify the more granular crises within that big thing we call the climate crisis. That's where I see, after writing way too many articles like that one I was showing earlier, when you break it into its component parts, there's a vulnerability crisis that's within the thing we call the climate crisis that's profound and actionable right now. And actually, I know a couple people, this is good. I know some people who could point to the vulnerability crisis and really illustrate. And actually, having been in Haiti, not too far away, that hurricane that hit the Bahamas, Dorian, it devastated a slum there called the Mud. That story was almost entirely a story of vulnerability, not of change. It wasn't climate change. It was climate vulnerability. And that's the justice side of the climate story. And it's a very powerful one to tell. And it kind of jams a thumb in that general idea. We just need to say climate emergency more loudly, and then people will get it. Because it says there's stuff you can do on the ground right now for people who are deeply vulnerable to today's climate hazards. Let's work on that, even while we work on that grander thing. Otherwise, you're missing something huge. And Craig, you know, having worked in disastrous situations in deeply poor countries, you know what I'm talking about too, the vulnerability to COVID-19. Just think about the stories emerging in sub-Saharan Africa or in the Amazon, as I said at the beginning.
Or in indigenous communities here in the United States, quite honestly.
Well, we did one here. Yeah, we did a session on Friday on indigenous impacts, both here and by the way, including Mexican immigrant indigenous communities in New York City who were affected by COVID-19. We were talking about that just a few days ago. So I did point to this. Climate Action Tech is a technology. It's like a group of people in Silicon Valley and at the, you know, Google, Facebook, and places like that who are committed to trying to create a sort of an ethic of impact on climate. And I should get you together with some of them too. So that I got to write this down. Tristan Harris, who started that. And then we have a lot to work on, which is great.
Definitely. Let's follow up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to just show a couple last slides. And I really thank you both for being, this was the inaugural session of what will be a weekly Monday, more workshop-y, what can we do now communication clinic, essentially. And there's tons to do. Here are some resources people can look up after this is over that I've assembled. We have a network here on sustainability, communication, innovation, j.mp/sustcomnet, and people can join. It's mostly for Columbia folks, but no need, it has to stay that way. And here's an assignment for anybody watching. It's kind of like the assignment we just described. Communicate. The heart of that word is commune. It's actually not me telling you something. It's sharing information. So we need to be in a two-way conversation with audiences, with communities. The more, the better. If you're out there, any of you too, and or anyone else watching, when you see something online that excites you or confuses you or infuriates you, tag it with SustCom and we can discuss it in future shows. You can propose a sustain what friendly takeover. This happened recently. You can see a picture here of a tweet of a collection of young scholars who do ecological economics, trying to make economics fit within the Earth's systems. And they essentially I handed them the driver's wheel. I was back in the green room, and they ran a session on this platform. And this can be anything. It could be actually, Craig, we can talk about one for doctors who want to kind of generate communication impact. We can do a session on just what we were talking about, Isabeau. This is part of what, we had that day of shut down academia a week or so ago, and I started tweeting, open up academia the day later. So what do we do now? That was a very important signal about race and culture and the work we have to do on campuses and everywhere for equity and for to be anti-racist. But now the question is, how do you open up academia to facilitate that? And these takeovers are part of what I'm going to do. And we can do seminars, which are much more, we could do 3 or 4 track, more Zoom style sessions here as well. And that can be a focused thing on social media or integrating art and animation and storytelling or whatever we want. And the calendar, this is my life now is kind of, now it has 4 pulses. Mondays are this. Wednesdays are sort of policy, heavy duty sessions on COVID-19 vaccine policy and the like, and climate policy going forward. Fridays are a review of the headlines, getting behind the hashtags and the getting past the infodemic and having journalists and others sort of point out what's really going on. Sundays, every Sunday on here is songs and stories. It's like a way to decharge and kick back and just remember that you're a human being and you have a heart as well as a brain. And that's kind of what we're doing. Next week, this round 2 is my friend Randy Olson, most famous. He's a marine biologist who had a tenured position at University of New Hampshire. He quit everything, went to Hollywood, became a filmmaker. He wrote a book on science communication called Don't Be Such a Scientist. And now he's sort of a communication evangelist on how to tell stories effectively. And I love that image is very funky on the left, but it's him. This is like 8 years ago. I did a Skype chat with him about getting out of the nerd loop when it comes to how we communicate. The nerd loop being talking to each other about communicating, not actually doing stuff. And I love the fact that he used, instead of a PowerPoint, he just held up cards. So that's next Monday, 4 p.m. Thank you, both of you, for being part of this today, Craig and Isabeau. And
Thanks for having us.
Let's keep at it, okay?
So, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Andy. And as always, thank you, Isabeau.
Yeah, thank you both. Nice to see you again, Craig.
Likewise.
Yeah, when was the last time you actually saw each other face to face?
Not that long ago. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to click. Oh, actually, I have to say one last thing. I forgot. The Sustain What webcast is a project of the Earth Institute Initiative on Communication and Sustainability. We're trying to tame the information environment, which is the only part of the Earth system that's changing faster than that actual biogeophysical environment. The ways we share and shape information are so consequential now. And it's a new feature of Earth that we haven't really adequately absorbed exists. So our job is to figure that out and do better. And please, if you're watching, follow up by sharing this with someone else, and feel free to support us down the line if you can. I thank Alex Halliday, who's the director of the Earth Institute, for bringing me in to create this kind of adventure. And thanks again to both of you. A bientôt.
Thanks so much. A bientôt. Bye-bye.